patterns, and you can feel like an all-new person. All you have to do is change who you're hanging out with or who you're hooking up with, and you can feel like an all-new person. That consumption and intimacy are not very time-possessive. They can change very quickly. Just change what you wear, just change who you're into, and you can feel like an all-new person. That's an advantage. It also, consumption and intimacy aren't very contingent on space. For instance, like, when does Amazon ever close? Or where is it? Actually, a few years ago, when my son was about 6 or 7, he asked for a board game. He asked for a game for his birthday. He asked for what was called an Angry Birds setup. Do you remember Angry Birds? It was the iPhone game, remember? Where there was this big controversy where birds were really mad at pigs, and we had no idea why they were, but there was a really bad situation between pigs and birds. And he got really into this, and so he asked for what was called an Angry Birds setup, which was essentially a board game version of Angry Birds. And that was the moment I realized I was old, because when I was a kid, we had board games, and we made those board games into video games. And that was natural, and that's how we liked it. Now kids these days have video games they make into board games. That doesn't seem right, and I didn't like it. And that's when I realized that I was old. So he asked for this Angry Birds setup, so we got it for him. And he liked it. It was a great birthday present. But he also got about $50 or $60 from his grandparents. And I was taking him home from soccer practice one day. And I said, Owen, I actually have a little bit of time. Do you want me to take you somewhere so you can spend the rest of your birthday money? You want to get another gift? And he said, yeah, that would be great. I said, well, what do you think you want to get so we know what store to go to? What do you want to get with your birthday money? He said, well, where did you and Mommy actually get that Angry Birds setup? I said, well, we got it on Amazon. He said, oh, that's perfect. Let's go to Amazon. I said, well, here's the thing. You can't really go to Amazon. And he said, well, where is it? And I said, well, you can't really go there. He says, where is it? And I said, well, you can't go there. And then he got philosophical on it. So it's like, okay, but where? Where is it? Where in the world is it? And I was like, well, you can't go there. He's like, but I know, but Daddy, where is it? It's like, you can't go, no, but where is it? And finally, it's like, listen, kid, it doesn't exist in this dimension. It exists in an alternate universe. You go on your computer, you type a magical code into your computer, and a magical fairy drops off what you asked for at your door. I don't know where it is. And in a certain sense, that's true. I mean, obviously, their headquarters are in Seattle, and there are big warehouses all over the place. But our interaction with it is it actually doesn't really exist in a space. It just kind of shows up at your door. And eventually drones will be dropping off your bananas for your breakfast. I mean, we don't know where this all is. But the advantage of this when it comes to consumption and intimacy is that it isn't very time possessive. Again, just change your consumer patterns and you can feel like an all-new person. But of course, the problem with this is that consumption and intimacy are fundamentally created to fail. That's how they work. That's how consumption actually works well. For instance, I mean, I'll admit it, that consumption actually works for me. I don't know if it works for you. When you get something new, do you have that warm, glowing feeling when you wake up in the morning? If I get something new and I wake up in the morning, I'll feel like, oh my gosh, there's something good in the world. What is it? And then I'll look at my wife and go, it's not you. What is good? Oh, I got a new phone, or I have a new computer, that it actually works. The problem with it is, and this is a big problem, it just doesn't last that long. So after 2 or 3 weeks, that good feeling you had from that new thing has gone away. But that's okay, because all you have to do is go back to the mall and get another thing. But you could see how that could quickly become what we would call a habitual pattern that could actually become an addiction. And actually now you can get your insurance to cover you for having a disorder called being a shopaholic. It's a legitimate thing. And it's connected to this deep longing to know, I think in some ways, who we actually are. Now, I don't know if you remember this. I know you young people won't remember this, but some of you people my age and older will remember. Do you remember this gum? It was called Fruit Stripe. Do you remember this gum? There was like a horse on it, and it was sticks, and each piece would have like zebra stripes on it in the fruit flavor. Now, this gum has been around for generations, and I think you can still get it. And when I was a kid, my mom would take me to the grocery store, and the deal was that I could go grab a pack of this gum, and I could, like the 40, the big pack, and I could chew as much of it as I wanted, as long as I stayed behind her and didn't make any commotion and didn't touch anything in the aisles. That was the deal. Now, if you've had this gum before, and you young people who haven't, you should try it. It is the most delicious, amazing gum you will ever have. I mean, you stick one of these pieces in your mouth, and your taste buds do somersaults of delight. I mean, the fruit flavor goodness is just unbelievable. It is just, oh my gosh, it's so delicious. However, there is one deep, deep tragic flaw to this gum, and this is not an exaggeration. It lasts, again, not an exaggeration, 4 seconds. That's it. It's like 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4, and it goes from HD to black and white. Like, it doesn't even just like dissipate in flavor. Like, it's just not as strong as it used to be. It was like, this is delicious, this is delicious, there's nothing there anymore. Now, when I was a kid, I was a genius child. So I would follow my mom, and I would stick one of these pieces of gum in my mouth, and I would chew it until it was dead. Instead of doing the smart thing and spitting that out, I would take another piece and baptize the old gum with the new flavor. So when we'd get to the checkout line after 20 minutes, I would have nothing but an empty cartridge of gum and a wad of tasteless gum in my mouth. But it's a great analogy for consumption and consumerism. That it actually works. It tastes really good. It just doesn't last very long. And you can find yourself caught. So the problem with consumption and intimacy, while they quickly, in a fast-paced world, allow you to quickly change this question, who am I? They also have some ways that they get us deeply caught. So what do we do with this? And what do we do with this, particularly as people who here on Wednesday night are in a church and want to ask big questions about who God is and what God is calling us to and how we live out our faith within the world, beyond these walls? What do we do with this? Well, I wonder if it isn't helpful to actually return to the biblical story. Of course it is. And you remember this biblical story of Jacob. And the story of Jacob, of course, is interesting because in Hebrew, often your name is your identity. So Jacob in Hebrew actually means the heel. The heel. And Jacob is named the heel because he comes into the world holding his older, hairier brother's heel. He's a twin, and he comes in holding his heel. But then Jacob lives into the name, and he becomes a heel. He actually becomes a con man. He becomes a pretty darn good con man. He not only cons his older, hairier brother out of his birthright, but then knowing that his older, hairier brother will kill him for having conned him, he flees to a faraway country, and there he makes another con and gets himself very wealthy. Well, Jacob's own father has died in the land that he's fled from, and he gets word that he's died, and he needs to return to the land of his father. But there's one big problem, and the big problem is his older, hairier brother still lives there. And he's convinced that when he gets there, his older, hairier brother will murder him. But he's got to go. So he gathers all of his cattle, all of his wives and children. He's made himself a wealthy man in this far country and starts returning home. Sure enough, he gets intel that Esau, his older brother, is coming. He's going to come and meet him. So looking around at his cattle and his horses, he takes them and he sends them ahead off to who he imagines is his older, murderous, hairy brother. And essentially what he does in that cultural context is send him suitcases and suitcases filled with cash and says, take this. Don't kill me. Go on a cruise. Go to the Caribbean. But go on a shopping spree. Get something new. Don't worry about me. Just go and buy some stuff. It doesn't work. He gets word that Esau is still coming. So now the stand-up guy that Jacob is, he looks at his wives and his children. This is a part we often don't tell in Sunday school. And he sends them off to who he assumes is his murderous older hairy brother. And essentially says, if you have to kill them, that's fine. If you have to turn them into slaves, that is fine. Just don't hurt me. You can take and do whatever you want with them. But now Jacob is left all alone. And left all alone, God shows up. The angel of the Lord shows up. And Jacob and God begin to wrestle. And wrestle and wrestle and wrestle, which is completely out of character because Jacob is much more of a runner than he is a fighter. But here he is wrestling with God. And he wrestles with God all the way to daybreak. To finally, this angel of the Lord has got to extract himself from the situation. So he reached down, touches Jacob's hip, knocks it out of socket. But still, again, completely out of character, Jacob will not let him go and holds on to him. And says to this angel, says to God, bless me, bless me, bless me. And God turns to Jacob and says, what is your name? In other words, what is your identity? Who are you? And Jacob doesn't answer as much as he confesses. He says, I'm Jacob. I'm the heel. If you have $50, I'll take $100 from you. I take what I want when I want. That is who I am. And God says to Jacob, no. You are no longer Jacob. You are Israel, the one who wrestles with God. When we think of actually what it means to live out our faith, when we think of what it means to pass on faith to our children, especially in this world of consumption and intimacy, maybe what it means to be people of faith is to be those who actually wrestle with God. What it means to actually live out in the wild and actually seek for God out in the wild is to be willing to wrestle with God and wrestle deeply with God. Maybe the way we pass on faith to our children, especially in an age where the lights and the electricity of consumption and intimacy are just blaring everywhere, is to show them parents and adults in a church who will wrestle with God, who will actually deeply wrestle with God, who will ask, who am I next to the midst of wrestling with God? To say who we are those who deeply wrestle with God. But there's a warning in that text that we often miss, that especially as adults we should be very aware of. And that warning in that text is that if you will wrestle with God, you will always leave limping. You will always leave dragging a leg behind you in the sand. And I wonder if the way we want to pass on faith to our children, the way we want to confess even to the world that we are living out our faith out into the wild, is actually not by having it all together. It's actually not by being super successful or having everything buttoned down and perfect. The way that we confess that we are people of God is to drag our leg behind us in the sand. That reminds them that we have spent all night up praying, that we have wrestled with God when people have been sick, that we have been there in our deepest questions, that we've been there together and sought for God in the midst of these big moments. I told you at the very beginning that my wife won this scholarship and that we traveled around the world. Well, after we were in Australia for a while, we actually ended the last about 4 or 5 weeks backpacking around Europe. And I don't know if you've been backpacking around Europe lately, but there's kind of a code of conduct as you meet people, fellow backpackers, ways you talk to them and introduce yourself. Well, we were actually trying to stretch this grant money. We were, like I said, the last 6 weeks, and so we were living on like $40 a day, just trying to get home and see sights while we were going around Europe. And so we had to take an overnight train from Italy, from Florence in Italy, all the way to Nice in the south of France. And we didn't have enough money to get our own sleeper car. And I had seen enough horror movies that start in Europe to know that scene one is young American tourists murdered in sleeper car. And so I was very nervous that we were going to have to share this sleeper car with these strangers, and I didn't know what to expect. So I got us there early, and I was looking for all like the escape routes if something was going to happen, and very nervous as we were waiting for who was going to share the sleeper car with us. But then we were relieved because this other couple about our age came in, and they were fellow North Americans. They were from Montreal, and it looked like they weren't the murdering type. So things seemed really good. So we entered into the kind of code of conduct of the way you talk to people as you meet them out backpacking. And so the first thing you talk about is, where have you been? So we shared where we'd been, and they shared where they'd been. Then the next thing you talk about is, where are you going? Well, we were going to the south of France just because we could, but then we were headed up to Geneva in Switzerland to do the theology tour. So we were going to see sites, the Calvin sites, and then go along the Lake of Lausanne to see this theologian Karl Barth before going into Germany to see where Dietrich Bonhoeffer's killed, then up into Berlin to do a walking tour of World War II sites in Germany. We were like 25 going on 85. Like that's where we were at. And we kind of knew it as we were telling them where we were going, because they were headed to Barcelona because the wine was flowing, the weather was warm, and the clubs were hopping. And we were like, yeah, we're headed to Germany because like we were pretty sure like we were pretty nerdy here. So we exhausted those 2 conversations, and then you get into the third one. And the third thing you talk about is, well, what do you do back home? Well, we were caught completely off guard, so they asked us, what do you do back home? And, well, Cara said that she was going to become an ordained pastor, and I said that I was going to become an academic theologian. And the looks on their face were priceless. Now I think they were pretty convinced we were the ones sent there to murder them in the middle of the night. And there was just this long, pregnant silence, and finally they went, oh, cool. And you can hear it. It's not the kind of cool like, wow, that is really cool. Tell me more about it. It's the kind of cool like, whatever just came out of your mouth, I don't understand, so cool, don't hurt me. That was the kind of cool that it was. So we sat there and were very uncomfortable for a while, and finally the young woman decided she better say something. So she said, well, I went to confirmation when I was a kid. And we're like, okay, you are fine, child. We will murder him first. Like, I don't know what the point was. Like, okay, that's fine. And so she said, yeah, I went to confirmation when I was a kid. But then she said, you know what? Actually, I got kicked out of confirmation when I was a kid. She says, I got kicked out of confirmation because I asked too many disturbing questions. Now, I'm the kind of person who thinks of the exact right thing to say about 5 or 6 minutes after it's appropriate. So most of my life is going, oh, I should have said. But this is one of the rare times in my life where I thought it was the perfect thing to say at the exact moment. So she says, I got kicked out of confirmation because I asked too many disturbing questions. And I said to her, I think that's too bad, because I think the best theologians and the most faithful Christians ask the most disturbing questions. And I think that's what it means to be a community that's living out in the wild, is to be a place where your disturbing questions are asked. To be out into the world and wrestling with God and asking these disturbing questions. If we want to pass on faith to a younger generation, it's creating these spaces where we can wrestle with our disturbing questions. So it's my job and my family to put my son Owen to bed every night. And you can realize what this is going to mean is that once I get this boy to bed, I can move on with my life, which means go watch hours and hours of terrible reality TV. So it's very important to me that I can get this kid to sleep. Now, we had made a terrible parenting mistake that we had decided that we were going to let him watch HBO. Now, I just figured, when is a 6-year-old going to learn about the mob in America? I mean, there was a marathon of The Sopranos on, and it just felt like the right thing to do. Okay, before you call social services, I'm kidding. It was not The Sopranos. Actually, HBO, believe it or not, has children's programming. I didn't know if you knew that, but it does. Like, Sesame Street is now on HBO. So they have children's programming, and in this particular show we allowed him to watch was, they had taken all these children's poems and animated them, and one of them was, I Have a Nightmare in My Closet. So Owen became convinced this night, about 6 years old, that he had a nightmare in his closet. So I was putting him to bed, and he says, Daddy, don't leave. There's a nightmare in my closet. And so as a good, compassionate parent, I think immediately, dang it. I think, and I think, how am I going to get this kid to sleep? Like, I'm sad that he's upset, but I got to get this kid to sleep so I can go watch terrible hours of reality TV. So I say, Owen, you don't have a nightmare in your closet. He's like, yeah, Daddy, I do. I do have a nightmare in my closet. And I'm thinking, how am I going to solve this problem? So I figure, I know what I'll do. I'll just turn to just pure, rational observation. So I say to him, Owen, how about we turn on the lights, we go and look in your closet and see if you can see a nightmare, and then you go back to bed. That sounded like good news to him. So I flipped on the light, we went to his closet. I didn't even know what a nightmare looked like, but he seemed to. We went and we looked through his closet. I said, do you see a nightmare in your closet? He said, no. I said, all right, well, get back into bed, thinking I'd solve this issue. So I put him back in bed, I tuck him in, I kiss him on the head, I go and shut the light off, and he goes, Daddy, don't go, wait. It wasn't there before, but it's back. The nightmare's back. So I'm thinking, oh, great. What am I going to do? I got to get this kid to sleep. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And then it dawns on me, I know exactly what I'll do. I'll turn to my religion. So I turned to him and I said, Owen, why don't I pray for you and ask Jesus to be with you? And then Jesus will be with you and you don't have to be scared. How about I pray and ask Jesus to be with you? And he looked at me with these big 6-year-old eyes like this was the greatest news he had ever heard. And he said, yeah, Daddy, pray for me. So I grabbed his little hands and I said, Jesus, please come now and be with Owen. Owen is afraid. Please be with him so he doesn't have to be afraid. Jesus, come and be with Owen now. Amen. I tucked him in again, and I kissed him on the head, and I thought to myself, I'm amazing. And I walked out the door, and I said goodnight, and I walked out the door, and I was about to walk out, and I heard him say, wait, Daddy, stop. And I knew it was going to happen. I was going to put my foot down. I was going to pivot to him. His eyes were going to be just filled with gratitude, and he was going to say, thank you, Daddy. Thank you, Daddy. I'm so lucky to have a daddy like you. So he said, Daddy, wait, stop. So I put my foot down. I pivoted, anticipating his eyes of gratitude. And instead, I got these deep, piercing look of skepticism. And he said to me, so where's Jesus? And I said, well, Owen, we prayed, and Jesus is now with you. He said, no, Daddy, Jesus isn't here. I said, no, Owen, we prayed, and Jesus is with you. He said, no, Daddy, Jesus isn't here. I said, Owen, we prayed, and Jesus is here. He said, no, Daddy, Jesus isn't here. I said, listen, kid, I have 3 advanced theological degrees. I know how this works. When you pray, Jesus shows up. And finally, he looked at me, and I said, Owen, Jesus is with you. And finally, he looked at me, and one big tear came out of his eye, of frustration, and just painted his cheek. And he said, Daddy, I am afraid, and Jesus isn't here. I think what it means to actually live our faith out in the wild is to be willing to seek for God in those closets, in those scary places, in those places where we are deeply afraid that maybe God is not present. There is a deep, deep truth that we hold on to, particularly those of us who trace our theological heritage back to the early Reformation. This deep truth that where it feels like God cannot be found, that is right where God is. That those places of fear, that those deep questions, that those deep places out in the wilderness when the wind blows and you feel alone, this God who comes to us on the cross, this God who comes to us in the person of Jesus Christ is present in those very moments. Think what it means to be people of faith are to wrestle with God, are to ask our disturbing questions, and then to bear these dark places of the closet, and to trust that when we are together and when we confess Jesus isn't here, that Jesus becomes present in those very moments. Let me pray for us. God, thank you for these people. Thank you that they have given up a Wednesday evening at the relative beginning of the school year to come and to think, to care for their children, and for their children to think and reflect on who you are and who you're calling them to be. I pray you bless each of them, that you bless parents with strength and perspective, that you bless other adults with the ability to confess their experience to each other and find support, and in all things find your presence. So be with them now as they journey into the wild, and trust them again, assure them again and again that you are there. Amen. Thank you, guys.
There we go. All right. Thank you all for being here tonight. We continue.